Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Great Central Valley in the San Luis Reservoir. This is here in my Assembly District. I'm Assemblyman Adam Gray. I represent the 21st Assembly District, Merced County and Stanislaus County, and we couldn't be more excited this afternoon to be hosting the governor to talk about some important investments. You know, every time we have a drought, it's always curious to me that we get a lot of elected officials and politicians up and down the state kind of scratching their head and saying, well, how did this happen? Well, the legislators here in the San Joaquin Valley, myself, Senator Caballero, Senator Hurtado, Congressman Costa, who's with us here today, we have a long track record of putting legislation forward to make the necessary investments in our water infrastructure. We have, for a half a century, underinvested in this space. And when I first met Gavin Newsom, he came through the valley and sat down with me, and we spent some time on water in that first conversation. We talked about the false narrative of fisher farmers, the false narrative of storage or no storage, and rather looking at a 21st century water policy that was an all-of-the-above approach, investing in conservation, in upgrades to our existing infrastructure, and just doing what it takes to be resilient as we face climate change amidst other challenges. So it's just with great excitement that we're here this afternoon to embrace and take that next step forward in making a real investment in California's future. I'd like to introduce next a colleague of mine who's a fighter for the Central Valley, a fighter for water, a fighter for this community, Senator Ana Caballero.
Thank you very much. A little bit taller than I am. Thank you very much, Assemblymember Gray, for that introduction. My name is Ana Caballero. I'm the senator that represents this region, which 2/3 of the district, which includes the Central Valley Rural Agricultural District, District number 12. And I'm really excited to be here, but also saddened because this is not the first time that I've been to a press conference asking for some action because we're in the middle of a drought. I was here with Governor Schwarzenegger and with thousands of people from the Central Valley asking for some action, asking for the opportunity to make the real investments in our infrastructure that are going to make a difference so that we can stop the boom and bust cycle of drought and no water and a wet year, and we don't see benefits to the system because of that. And so I'm here today because this is a really important time in our state, in our state's history. One, because we're just finishing up one of the worst worldwide pandemics and one of the worst wildfire seasons that California has ever seen. And we're starting our next, or I guess it could be a continuation of a drought that's never left us. And so we fundamentally need to make the changes to our system that are going to build resiliency, that are going to create an opportunity for our residents to have clean drinking water, for our agricultural community to have the water that they need to be able to feed the world, and to be able to do it in a way that lifts the entire state. So I'm really excited that the governor is here. I know he's absolutely committed to getting this right. And we're here in unity to say it's time, we need to get it done, and we have resources in our budget to get it done. And you can see, based on the water level behind us, that we do need the resiliency in our water system. So I want to thank the governor for being here today. I think he's got a very, very important announcement that it will fundamentally help the Central Valley. And we're here united to say, let's get it done, and let's get it done this year. Next, I'd like to bring to the mic our congressman who has dedicated his life to solving water issues and to bringing federal resources into the valley so that we can build the infrastructure that we need to be able to build the resiliency that we need. Congressman Costa.
I want to thank Senator Ana Caballero for those kind words and Assemblymember Adam Gray, but it's really a team effort working with Senator Hurtado and the Valley delegation as we work together to represent the incredible people in this valley who we serve. Since I first took office in 1978, there have been 5 major droughts in California. Since 1978, 5 major droughts. As we know, it tends to be either feast or famine, more water than we know what to do with, or extremely dry periods as we're experiencing today. So we know droughts are nothing new. And this is a bad situation that with climate change is only getting worse. We're staring down at what could be a disastrous summer and fall with the potential of communities running out of water and fires. Our reservoirs are half their historical average. 90% of the snowpack has already melted because of last year's dry conditions, and water's being absorbed at a rate that we cannot even imagine because of the ground so dry. 8% of snowpack is left, in other words. Through 2020 and 2021, we've seen the second driest 2-year period on record, only second to the catastrophic drought of 1976 and 1977. Think about that. So we need a balanced approach, and the governor today is going to provide us the opportunity to structure between state and federal efforts that balanced approach, using all the water tools in the water toolbox. And Governor, we're glad you're here. There are many demands on our state's limited water resources, and with climate change, as I said, it becomes all too obvious. The demands on the operations of our water projects in dry years like this one requires that we strike a reasonable balance. And the State Water Quality Control Board has that responsibility, along with the Department of Water Resources and the entire resources agencies. We have to balance between competing uses of water for municipalities, for people, for agricultural use, to grow our food. Where water flows, food grows, and to make sure that we protect the environment. All difficult competing uses of water. Our water system is highly interconnected between the state and the federal projects. This project right here is jointly operated between the federal government and between the state of California. It was envisioned to be that way. But the human impact is real. As I said, I've lived through 5 of these droughts as an elected official in the state legislature and now in Washington. These farm communities here, during the last drought, not only had land fallow, but we had 40% unemployment in towns like Fireball and Mendota and Dos Palos. Imagine when almost half the people in town don't have a job, and the impacts to the schools and to the businesses. These are real human impacts that sadly we see repeating itself. So we know what the vulnerabilities are to our infrastructure system, and we have an opportunity to fix some of those things. We have to use all the water tools in our water toolbox to fix our broken water system, just as we must fix our broken immigration system. For example, we're standing here at San Luis Reservoir. We have an opportunity here because it's required for seismic retrofit to repair this dam. And in doing so, we can raise it 10 feet. That would add over 140,000 acre-feet of additional water supply. The governor's announcement today will complement legislation that I and Senator Feinstein and others are carrying on the federal level. We have legislation that will provide $653 million of federal dollars for the California Aqueduct, for the Delta Mendota Canal, and for the Friant-Kern Canal. And the state, for the first time, is going to partner with us, and Governor, we're thankful for your support. Now, we want to make sure the canals are operating at full capacity. We want to complete Sites Reservoir. We want to raise San Luis Reservoir. There are a lot of water tools, including groundwater management, that Don Cameron will tell you farmers are eager to participate in. But I have the honor of introducing the governor of the great state of California. I've served, believe it or not, with 7 governors. 7 governors. And Governor Gavin Newsom is working really hard every day to do a good job with difficult circumstances. He's had to deal with horrific fires. He's had to deal with mudslides and earthquakes. He's had to deal with a pandemic and now extreme drought. And at the same time, he's trying to solve the disagreements between the voluntary agreements and the biological opinions to implement SGMA. Being governor of California is not an easy job. It's not an easy job. And Governor Newsom every day is doing his best to solve and work with everybody to solve these problems so that we, in fact, can ensure that the Golden State of California remains the Golden State. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce the governor of the great state of California, the 5th largest economy in the world. Governor Newsom, we're glad you're here. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you all of the esteemed leaders that are assembled here. And I'll mention a number of our key agency leaders, but I appreciate the Congressman recognizing Don Cameron in particular. I just want to recognize Wade Crowfoot, head of our Natural Resources Agency, and the team that is assembled here, and from the water departments represented by a number of key leaders that I'll introduce in a moment. But I want to just to highlight why we're here. It's self-evident to many folks that the hots are getting a lot hotter in this state. The dries are getting a lot drier. We have to recognize that we're living in a world that we were not designed to live in. We have a system, conveyance system, a water system that was designed for a world that no longer exists. And it's incumbent upon us to acknowledge that, and incumbent upon us to reimagine a different future, much more resilient, much more vibrant, much more dynamic water delivery system here in this state. 3 weeks ago, literally 3 weeks ago, we announced a state of emergency, a proclamation of a declaration of emergency in the Russian River watershed, impacting just 2 counties in the state, notably Sonoma County and Mendocino County. Today, building on that proclamation, we are extending a proclamation of a state of emergency to 39 additional counties in the state of California. Now, all in total, 41 counties are in a drought emergency. As we said at the time just 3 weeks ago, we were going to flex up based upon need. We'd look at the issue of hydrology. We'd look at the issue of snowmelt. We look at the issues of preparedness, and we do so in real time. Accordingly, we make that commitment in an iterative process as we move forward into the second year of a drought to keep an open mind and to be mindful of the dynamics and the changing conditions as it relates to hydrology, as it relates to snowmelt, as it relates to storage, conveyance, and the like here in the state. Let me just talk about the last 3+ weeks. In the last few weeks, we've lost roughly 500,000 acre feet of runoff compared to what we had anticipated, which, put into language that I hope people can understand, is the equivalent of 1 million households receiving water for a year. That's just in the last number of weeks in the state of California. What we've experienced is what some had predicted, but no one had necessarily experienced, and that was snowmelt so acute that it didn't actually run off into reservoirs or rivers, but it actually seeped into the dry, parched ground underneath, much of it evaporating completely. The snowmelt has been precipitous, and it's happened primarily because of drought conditions preceding this year's snowpack, but also because of the warmer temperatures that all of us have experienced over the course of the last number of weeks. This all off a year 2020, which was the 3rd driest year in recorded history here in the state of California. So this drought, though the 2nd year of a drought, happening just a few years after the end of a 5-year drought that began in 2012 and ended in 2016, in many respects is familiar, but in other respects is more challenging and more acute than we could have imagined. I'm standing here in front of a reservoir that's about 57% of its seasonal average in terms of capacity, 49% of its total capacity. That runs roughly equivalent, plus or minus, to what you're seeing in reservoirs all across the state. While the snowpack came in relatively well this year, and the April snowpack, though modest, the, again, acute conditions have created even more challenges for these reservoirs and our capacity to meet the needs of 40 million thirsty Californians. And so this drought proclamation should provide us flexibility, should address issues around conveyance, working with water agreements, different water agencies, allow us more flexibility at a local and regional basis, allow us some reprieve around SEQA regulations and permitting permitting issues, as well as issues associated with contracting. Some relief. But at the end of the day, that's not good enough. And that's why we're also pleased to announce today $5.1 billion, a record investment into water resiliency and water infrastructure in this state. $5.1 billion. Just today, we announced the state of California is running an operating surplus of $75.7 billion. $75.7 billion. We're using that surplus and the support. Congressman Costa's critical support of $26 billion from the federal stimulus to make investments in critical infrastructure. No more critical need than addressing the water needs here in the Central Valley, but also the water needs all up and down the state of California, watersheds large and small, not just the new and substantive declaration today as it relates to the Sacramento-San Joaquin watershed, the Delta watersheds, and Tulare watershed, but also what's happening up Northern California at the Klamath watershed, what's happening with small water systems all up and down the state of California that rely on depleted groundwater, what's happening broadly to an agricultural industry that's working through the new guidelines and requirements, responsibilities under SGMA, the challenges for habitat and wildlife and the Pacific Flyway, issues related all to this drought emergency. How can we flex and make the critical investments that we need long-term on issues of conveyance and distributions, issues related to infrastructure like rebuilding canals, but also how can we be mindful in the short run of some of the critical needs for habitat for steelhead and salmon as it relates to cold water temperatures that we need to allow for at peril of some extinction issues occurring on our watch later this year. Not hyperbole to suggest that. What can we do in terms of more resiliency on floodplains and watersheds, and how can we invest in habitat that can bring us back to some semblance of historic normalcy to allow us, again, more resilience through these extremes year in and year out in the state of California? How do we provide emergency supplies, emergency grants to those same water systems? That's all part of that $5.1 billion package. How do we secure the needs of small water systems at the same time meet the needs of million-plus Californians that not only don't have access to safe, affordable, and clean drinking water, but also can't pay their water bills because of this pandemic-induced recession? And that's why we're also pleased to announce today, in addition to the drought proclamation, now including 41 counties in the state of California, in addition to the $5.1 billion that we will invest in water portfolio and water infrastructure investments in the state of California. We're also proposing for consideration of the legislature an additional $1 billion to help people offset their water bills, and in turn, particularly for small water systems, provide some stability for those water systems that are in peril of financial insolvency related to not only this pandemic, but the extreme drought that we're experiencing. So $1 billion will also be invested in that effort. So that's the totality, at least in the immediate of the actions. And by the way, when I say immediate, many of these actions are emergency actions, emergency appropriations. Many are medium-term strategies, and yes, those long overdue strategies, all in expectation and in partnership with the federal government, recognizing that's the way it used to be done. When President Kennedy was right here in 1962 And you could see the quote when they did the groundbreaking for this site. It was about partnerships, federal and state partnerships. To be big, you got to be big in big things. And there's nothing bigger than the work that was done in the 1950s to invest in this infrastructure, northern, southern California, this remarkable conveyance system that helped us build the world's largest middle class and helped obviously make California, not just California, but this nation, as vibrant, as strong as it is. And we recognize our responsibility in the future to do more and do better, mindful of the changing conditions, mindful of climate change, mindful of the reality that not having a drought increasingly is becoming that's the anomaly. It's really not anomalous any longer not to be in a drought when you consider what's happened in the western United States, not just here in California, since 2000. And so we're here with expectation. We're here with some relief. And we're here with Joaquin and Carla and other members of the team that are happy to answer any questions related to some more of the specifics around this drought proclamation. With that, of course, we're happy to answer any questions.
Hi, Governor. This is Jocelyn with CBS 47. You talked a little bit about the last 3 weeks since you initially did that proclamation with the drought emergency. I was wondering if you could talk specifically a little bit more pertaining to the Central Valley. What happened in those 3 weeks? We've seen state lawmakers calling on you to call a statewide drought emergency. What happened in those 3 weeks that made you come here and finally declare an emergency here in the Central Valley?
I've been here pretty much every week for the last 4 or 5 months. I think this is my 12th trip back in just a few months. So I'm in the Valley quite consistently. So it's not an intellectual exercise for me being here in communities large and small all up and down the state to see the conditions firsthand. We're not announcing a statewide drought emergency. We still don't think that's necessary. We made the point 3 weeks ago, and we were explicit that we will look at regional conditions, we'll look at local conditions, and we will flex up. And as I specifically mentioned a moment ago, as it relates to 500,000 acre feet that were down and the acuity of the temperatures over the course of the last 3.5 weeks and the lack of snow melt that we had anticipated, even on the basis of projections that assumed warmer temperatures, even on the basis of projections that were upgraded and updated related to the drought, we are here making the announcement today. 39 additional counties joining Mendocino and Sonoma, specifically impacted from watersheds in Northern California and the Klamath to watersheds here, more commonly referred to as the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta watersheds and Tulare watershed. We are likely, on the basis of what is occurring across the state, to increase the total number of counties as conditions present themselves, and we're mindful of our need to maintain an openness to look at those conditions in real time. But what's significant about today's announcement is the $5.1 billion from the state's surplus, a historic amount of investment into the Valley, providing us flexibility and providing us the capacity to do things that we otherwise couldn't above and beyond any drought proclamation. But one thing I want to also make clear, and you should all know this in the Valley, you're also not necessarily in need of a new drought proclamation because you're still in the old drought proclamation as it relates to flexibilities. There were 4 counties that were excluded when that proclamation ended in 2017. Fresno, Tulare, Tuolumne are among those 3. We're just modernizing and updating those details in this new drought proclamation.
Hi, Governor. This is Kirsten with KC24 in Fresno. Wondering, as we move into the summer months, do you foresee any sort of water use restrictions for Californians, and how you assess the conservation need for, say, like the average Californian resident? Well,
we're mindful of a couple points, and I made this point 3 weeks ago. We have a website, saveourwater.com, that reminds people of just common sense things they can use, particularly urban users, as it relates to looking at leaks in your home, and the importance of saving water through leak protection efforts around washing your clothes, but just trying to do it common sense, making sure you have a full load, and issues around showers. Those are all voluntary measures. They're all highlighted on the Save Our Water website. There are no mandatory requirements yet in the state of California. And I made this point 3 weeks ago as well. Not only as it relates to those voluntary opportunities to do more to save water, particularly for urban users, but also the fact that we're coming into this drought a little bit more prepared than the last time. not only are we more prepared in terms of expertise and insight, not only are we more prepared because we actually just did an analysis of our 2016 drought that occurred between 2012 and 2016. We did an after-action report, submitted lessons learned to the legislature just a few weeks ago, and put together a water resiliency portfolio with 100 specific action items, of which that $5.1 billion will plug in to those already pre-programmed strategies in real time, but also by the nature of the fact that 16% less water is being utilized in this state compared to this time in that first drought proclamation. And so we have changed our habits in this state, and those are good habits and encouraging habits, and that's because Californians have taken their water use very seriously, and we're very proud of that and mindful that we need to do more, but also grateful of the work that continues to happen despite the fact that that old drought emergency expired in 2017. Well, I think they should be pleased with the state's response, our resolve, the work we've done as a state to prepare for this. Again, we have a lot of expertise in this space. We just came out of a 5-year drought just a few years ago. We have the exact same team that was principal and participatory in that last drought. So it didn't take much to update some of our emergency declarations. It didn't take much to update our resiliency, drought emergency and resiliency task force, that interagency task force we put together, a lot of familiar faces. We're working on voluntary agreements. At the same time, we're working with the federal government on trying to address some of the litigation issues and some new strategies to help support the state's effort. And the difference is now we have an open hand, not a closed fist, with the federal government in terms of willingness to engage and support the state and its agricultural community and its urban users. So I'm more optimistic than I would have been a year ago, but mindful of the acuity of this climate-induced drought, which obviously is extreme and self-evident to anybody who's observing.
Hi, Governor. Another question. Wanted to go back a little bit to the announcements you made this morning. I saw this question popping up. I'm not sure if you addressed it, so forgive me if you have. But just how the set of announcements you made today would pertain to those who are undocumented. I know we have a big population here in the Central Valley, and that's a worry. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it includes all I-10 holders. We announced, and I appreciate the opportunity. Today, we announced two historic. First, the largest state surplus in American history, $75.7 billion operating surplus. And we announced the largest tax rebate in American history, not just California history, $12 billion, $11.9 billion. That represents 2/3 of all Californians, 78% of all tax filers will be getting a stimulus check back, and that includes I-10 holders. So regardless of your immigration status, people that were left out of the federal program, Californians aren't going to leave behind. Anyone that represents the Valley, anyone that has had the benefit of their health needs met, as well as food security needs addressed, should celebrate the contributions of people, regardless of their immigration status, in the state of California that make California great. And we're very mindful about how politically charged these things are. And with all due respect, California has the backs of our diverse communities, mixed status families, and we're very mindful of how our food is not only procured, produced, distributed, but mindful of the incredible contributions of those essential workers. And we're pleased to do what the federal government, unfortunately, was not in a position to do.
Hi, Governor. I believe you touched on it briefly, but with today's declaration, what should California residents, should they be using less water for activities such as showering and watering lawns, and what other concessions should Californians be prepared to make?
Well, as I said, they already have. Californians are utilizing 16% less water than they did at this time compared to the previous drought. So we go into this drought with a baseline that's 16% below where we were in 2012 because people have been mindful of not spending more than 5 minutes willy-nilly in a shower, mindful of looking at a full load of laundry, mindful that if they have a water leak, that it would be wise to try to save money, not just save water by fixing those leaks, mindful of the fact that they can provide more resiliency by looking at drought-tolerant plants and landscaping in and around their homes. We want to encourage more of that. There's no mandate in that space. We've got many different tools in the toolkit, websites up to encourage more of that conservation, but that's not part of the announcement today. With that, I just want to thank Congressman Costa for all his outstanding leadership and his advocacy. I can assure you, when we make announcements like this, they're not done in a vacuum. They're not done without consideration and with strong representation from Congressman Costa to Assemblymember Adam Gray, who's been any more and just expecting us to do better as it relates to meeting the needs of people here in the Central Valley, and Senator Caballero the same, representing not only the valley, but also representing so many other water users all up and down the state of California that ultimately will be benefited from this announcement today. We're honored to be back in the Valley to make the announcement, but this announcement and these investments will impact 40 million Californians strong. And with that, we're grateful for this opportunity to update and highlight these investments. We look forward to working with the legislature in a collaborative spirit to get these done and to get these investments included in this year's budget. Take care.